participants and colleagues, good afternoon and a very warm welcome back to our Engel Völkers webinar series held in Zurich. Today, we talk about how to buy real estate with cryptocurrency. Why? Inflation up, interest rates up, volatility up. In times like this, people seek opportunities to diversify no matter which currency. Does everybody know how to sell equity, bonds, and other asset classes through their house bank? Yes, they do. Does everybody know how to do it with crypto? No, probably they don't. My screen is telling me we have a bit more than 200 participants live today. So we do have probably the right topic, but even more important, we have the right people on this panel to tell us how to do that in the future. My name is Niki, Thomet, managing partner at Engel Völkers, Lake Zurich. And with me today, I have Ntigrintakis, founder and CEO of XEROF. With him is Executive Director, Marc Taverner. Gentlemen, good afternoon and thank you for joining. Marc, you have over 25 years of experience in technology markets, involved with blockchain since 2014 and founding one of the leading blockchain trade association with over 170 company members, which was actually supported by the European Commission and with over 40 regulators and governments on its advisory body. Marc, share with us today, why did you start Zerov?
Well, good afternoon, Niki. Good afternoon, everybody. And Niki, firstly, thank you very much for having us. It's a real pleasure and an honor to be here today. So your first question, why did we start Zerov? Well, with all the experience that both Nick, myself, and the rest of the team at Zerov have in the blockchain and crypto space, we saw three things principally that encouraged us to push the formation of Zerov. The first was that we saw a gap in the market for high-level professional services that would allow crypto asset holders to purchase high-value assets through a regulated, professional, and transparent business. There just really still isn't anything that meets those criteria today, apart from Zerov, as we can see. The second reason that drove us was that we saw another gap in the market for a service to be delivered to sellers of property who want to access this audience of high net worth crypto holders, but who, as you mentioned, perhaps don't have the knowledge or the confidence of how to engage in this still relatively new market. And the third reason that drove us was frankly down to timing. And to a certain extent, this goes back to the work that you mentioned I did with the trade association. So we see that the market structure and the regulatory focus is now creating a somewhat unique mix of push and pull. Push is that the regulators are beginning to develop clearer processes and requirements and encouraging or even demanding that crypto operators register and operate along regulated frameworks or as regulated businesses. Now, these frameworks, these processes, these guidelines make it easier for a business like Zerov because there are rules, there are taxonomies, and therefore to ensure that you can comply if you have a rule book makes it a lot easier than it used to be. So that's the push. The pull is that, frankly, consumers and businesses want to engage with the crypto market, but they didn't really know how to until now. And furthermore, they wanted to engage, but they wanted to engage in a way that gave them confidence that there was professionality, that there were business processes, that there was transparency, that the businesses and people they're engaging with were real, that there was some degree of knowledge about whether registration, whether beneficial ownership of both the assets and the companies ultimately ended up. And, you know, all of these facts begin to get us to the point where we believe the timing for Zerov to deliver a solution that satisfied or at least filled some of these gaps and could play to this timing was right. So we've launched Zerov to help build confidence between consumers and businesses and to allow them to engage with this growing crypto market in a way that doesn't require them all to be specialists in crypto from the very first moment that they choose to engage.
Thank you so much, Marc. I think timing is probably a key word, not only in the crypto space, right? We see cryptocurrencies go up and down, like with many other investments. Nick, you are a successful global entrepreneur, working many years in financial services, Bitcoin enthusiast, and probably crossing many opportunities on a daily basis. So referring to timing and maybe also other aspects, what made you invest in this business?
Good afternoon, Niki, and thank you for having us here in this panel. When, as a crypto holder, I wanted to buy a property, and I went to all exchanges in Switzerland and tried to open a crypto account. And it took so long time to just open a crypto account, and then nobody really could settle for a property purchase. So then we started to explore how to do that, and how regulatory and technically. And after spending nearly 2 years with an amazing team, we got the regulatory approval in December 2021. And now we are operating and helping other individuals and companies like me to buy property around the world with crypto in a safe, compliant way. So this is why we build XEROF.
Thank you so much, Nick. Buying real estate with crypto, this is what we are here for today. Gentlemen, I've prepared a few questions, and at the same time, there are actually plenty of questions coming in from our participants already. They all have the possibility to ask questions through the chat function. So I will start first with my own questions and then take questions from our participants as we go. So we do go by the flow, and Marc, please feel free to use your slides as they fit. And my first question for today is why we should use XEROF for our transactions.
Yeah, thank you, Niki. So I'm sure many of the audience listening and those that might follow this recording will be very happy to hear that I'm not going to use any slides today. So I'm not going to beat you to death with pre-prepared PowerPoint slides. This is going to be very much a bit more of a discussion to try and answer questions and share information. So why should people consider using Zerov for transactions? Well, the first reason is the reason that Nick beautifully demonstrated, which is that we're specialists in our field. We've got decades of experience in the crypto market. We've got a good amount of experience in the property market. And frankly, this business came about through a very personal desire to solve a problem that Nick experienced. And he's not the only individual to experience this problem either. We are, as Zerov, we've developed processes which means that we're now able to settle in third party. And as we speak today, we believe that we're unique in being able to do this in the marketplace. But it doesn't just stop there with processes. The first thing that I want to say that is really important about the crypto market at the moment is that it's about building relationships with all parties, about creating established business processes that make transactions happen smoothly, efficiently, and painlessly. And we've invested a lot of time as Zerov in working with partners, yourselves, Niki, as you know, banking partners, lawyer practices, notarization services, not just in Switzerland, but around the world. And what that means is we've now got a raft of business processes established that mean we can settle directly with notaries, with lawyers, with escrow services, with escrow holders, or any other similar trusted third parties that officially represent buyers and sellers. And onto these processes, onto these business relationships that we've established, we add what we believe is the most critical aspect of all, which is that we as Zerov provide direct personal management with an individual. What that means is a member of our team works through each transaction directly with the buyer and seller. And unlike many other services in the crypto space, Zerov is not an app. We're not a software interface that is running off some unambiguous server in some third country that might be offshore. We're very clear, we're transparent, we give a personal service, it's a human service, and the service we've built has come about through a recognition that we wanted to do exactly what we've built as a service to provide. So we're solving those friction points.
You mentioned there are several other providers in the market. When I started to warm up on this topic, when I started to prepare for our discussion today, I spoke with a couple of people and I tried to get a bit of market sentiment, you know, what is the status, where are people do feel comfortable? And we hear left, right, and center that there are several crypto exchanges. You mentioned it as well. Why not use all of them, or why use you versus the other one?
Yeah, that's a great question, Niki. You know, there are many crypto exchanges. I've lost count of how many now. But I think what's important to note is that the top 3 crypto exchanges account for nearly 70% of the global volume of crypto transactions. And what that means is they have to operate in a very competitive market based on volumes. And when you're operating on volumes, you need to have massive efficiency in your model. And that does not allow any of the unique aspects of Zerov to exist in many of those larger exchanges. So for example, Zerov is unique in being Swiss headquartered. We're partnered with a Swiss bank and Swiss law firms, which means that we're real. We have a headquarters. We are located in a country. We're not an amalgamous unit of different servers spread around the world with a very complex corporate structure that's very hard to understand from the outside. We're clear, we're real, we're not an offshore company, we're not a transaction hub, we're based in Switzerland, our partners, our banking partners are Swiss, our law firms are Swiss, we're licensed in Switzerland specifically to perform these transactions. And I must add that the license we have is what's known as a self-regulatory organization license called VQ, through an organization called VQF. And what that provides, or what that means that we as Zerov have to adhere to, are strong requirements on due diligence and anti-money laundering, because VQF, as an SRO, self-regulatory organization, is supervised by FINMA, and therefore the obligation for the VQF members to adhere to these very strict requirements around due diligence and anti-money laundering is very high. I just want to reiterate a couple of points I made earlier, Niki, as well. We're a specialist in this field, not a generalist. So unlike many of the larger exchanges that need to have very high volumes and therefore need to cater to every transaction that's going, Zerov has chosen this space to operate in only. So we focus on property. We help buyers who have crypto buy property from sellers who want to reach this market. And therefore we have more knowledge and experience than some of the larger players. And we rely, as I mentioned earlier, on high quality and individual personal service, not a mass market app that needs to scoop up high volumes and a chat bot that you might not get a great deal of sense from. And as I mentioned earlier, we have established and invested quite some considerable time, which I know you will empathize with, Niki, because this is how you got to know Nick. We've invested a lot of time in building relationships with trusted third parties. These relationships take time to establish because we have to demonstrate as Zerov that we have all of the business processes that mean we can be trusted, that we have the due diligence, that we have the KYC, know your customer, that we have the AML, the anti-money laundering processes in place, and that they're maintained. So there are just some reasons why, in our opinion, in my opinion, Zerov is a better service to use than perhaps some of the more general crypto exchanges that do in fact exist around the world.
You mentioned a lot of keywords, Marc. Maybe deep diving a little bit from the seller side. You mentioned trust. You mentioned relationship. In our industry, from a seller's perspective, the most important thing is like the KYC, the due diligence. From a bank perspective, it is the source of wealth, that we know where does the money come from with which we buy a real estate. So what benefits are there in particular from a seller's perspective?
Yeah, Niki, and you raised some good points there. You know, crypto is still a little hard for individuals or organizations that don't have specific knowledge to navigate through, because getting to a point where you can prove the source of funds, getting to a point where you can run due diligence on your buyer, and then understanding not only the proof of funds, but the funds themselves and whether they've been involved in any nefarious activity. Those three aspects all require, still in the crypto space, a certain amount of specialist knowledge or specialist skills or specialist tools. So what we've built as Zerov are some processes that mean sellers can avail themselves, they can get the benefit of these services that we have as Zerov without having to become crypto market specialists themselves. And that means that sellers are able to access this growing market of high net worth individuals and investors that might previously have been inaccessible to them unless they spent a lot of time investing in building services, building understanding, and creating perhaps even a specific department to be able to address this market. So we take away the need for sellers to build up this specialist knowledge, and we manage the entire process front to back end. An example of that which I can give you to be specific, as you asked for a deep dive, is on how we deal with the funds themselves that relate to specific transactions. So when crypto funds flow into a business that is conducting a transaction on behalf of a buyer and seller, it is not typical, or sometimes typically what happens is those funds will flow into one very large pot. And it will be hard for a business to be able to keep a track of those funds, or a buyer or a seller to keep a track of those funds that are specifically related to that transaction, because they disappear into this, amorphous mix, which is called an exchange. So to try and deal with that challenge at Zerov, we use something called segregated wallets. Now that's a bit of a technical term, but effectively what it means is it's like a separate and individual and unique bank account into which the funds, the crypto, for each transaction go as we are undertaking the transaction. That means that an individual, a buyer and seller, has the comfort that they can see the crypto has gone into this unique wallet, this unique bank account, if you will, place to hold the funds. They can see the funds, and they have the confidence that at all points they can see those funds are segregated, are isolated, are individually contained, because they only relate to that transaction, and they will only be used to power that transaction. They won't go into one amorphous pot that might then be used to do spread betting, to provide liquidity to other parts of the exchange, and ultimately provide risk should the exchange collapse for whatever reason. And we've heard a lot of that in the crypto space. So at Zerov, these segregated wallets, these unique and individual containers into which the crypto is deposited that relates to each transaction, gives confidence to the buyer and seller that the funds are easily identifiable, that they're linked directly to a specific transaction, and this helps to protect the funds and provides transparency to all parties. So there's just one example to go into a little bit of a deep dive about some of the processes that we've built that provide benefits for the sellers.
When we do a real estate transaction in Switzerland, we need a bank, right? So it's not a transaction as we know usually in the crypto space between a crypto buyer and a crypto seller. We need a bank which is taking the money to issue payment instructions to the notary. So there's a bank involved. The due diligence that you just explained, which sounds quite a complex process to me and a lot of knowledge required in this fairly new crypto space, is this due diligence actually done by you guys, or are the banks doing that due diligence?
Great question, Niki. So we do a lot of the due diligence ourselves because, as you were talking about earlier, the source of funds, the know your customer, and some checks on the actual funds, the crypto coins themselves, are undertaken by us. Now, we do use specialist services to do this because these services have been built to support and power the crypto market, but they require a little bit of specialist knowledge to understand how to work them. So typically what we will do is we will run traditional checks on individuals to satisfy the know your customer requirements, the due diligence on the individuals or the corporations. And sometimes they can be simple, sometimes they can be complex. And we do work with the banks, with the law firms, and with the other trusted third-party service providers when requested to provide more information. So we as Zerov interface with those trusted third parties to present the data that they're asking for, to adhere to their processes. And sometimes they do ask for a little more information, and then we're happy to provide that. As it relates to the cryptocurrency itself, what we're looking to understand is not just the source of funds, but the funds themselves. So with all cryptocurrencies, with most cryptocurrencies, you're quite readily able to see the transactions that those coins have been used within in the past. And we run these types of checks as well, so that we can understand where these coins have history and what type of history they have. That information is not always shared with the third parties, but as Zerov, we do run those processes as part of our due diligence. And that information can exist to give comfort to the banking partners, because many of our banking partners are still on a bit of a journey to understand the world of crypto and to assimilate, to acquire the knowledge that will give them more comfort in being able to operate in this space. And in that meantime, during that period where they are building up this knowledge, we're very happy as Zerov to provide additional information should it be requested. And to your point specifically about how we work with the banks, in all of the transactions that we've done thus far, there have been none which any of our banking partners have blocked. There have been a couple where they've come to us and asked for a little more information, which we've provided. But we're very happy to say that on the provision of that information, our banking partners have completed all of the processes and transactions that we've requested them to.
That's a fantastic news, Marc. I'm actually almost a bit surprised that the cooperation with all the banks seem to work quite smooth. I hear they rely a lot on you, right, when it comes to due diligence, because you have the expertise in the crypto space. You do understand, as you just explained, the complexity, but at the same time, banks also do their own due diligence, right? And would you say there is a difference, for example, between the larger banks? You know, in Switzerland, we like to talk about, is UBS and Credit Suisse and all the big ones, are they taking it? And how does it work with smaller private banks? Do you see a difference in the handling, and a difference in the stage of life cycle where they are in handling these crypto transactions?
That's a great question, Niki. Look, I think many years ago, when I started out in this space, which was 2014, yes, there was a big difference, in as much as the large banks were quite reticent to get involved in anything to do with crypto, and the smaller, more nimble banks were a bit more open-minded. I don't think that is true today. I think today what we tend to see is a good deal of education about crypto within all banks. And most banks have specialist teams, specialist divisions looking at innovation, and crypto is part of that innovation team. And they've done a really, really good job of educating themselves, of surrounding themselves with great talent who really understand this marketplace. And so we as Zerov are quite hopeful about the future of relationship with banks around the world. It's certainly not where I was, Niki. If you might give me the luxury of 2 minutes, I'll tell you a story from 2014, and I won't mention the name of the large bank. Is that okay, Niki?
Yes, please, very much.
Super. So in 2014, I started working for a very large crypto provider, one of the original mining companies, very big brand name. And prior to that, I'd been advising one of the leading UK banks on how to develop conference call services that wouldn't fail. And this meant I went up to the 53rd floor of the bank. I sat next to the chairman on the right-hand side, as he kept reminding me when these very important conference calls went ahead. And the reason I sat on the right, as he reminded me, was if it failed, he was right-handed and he could hit me. I then joined this this crypto company, and thought, well, it would be a great example to leverage my relationship and go and talk to this bank about what looked like a great piece of innovation around the world of finance, crypto. And as I sent an email, the response came back saying, Mark, we're really sorry, but we will meet you in the Starbucks underneath our building. We can't even allow you to sign the visitors register book because now you're involved in crypto, you're a PR risk. That was 2014. Fast forward 4 years later in the same company, I could not keep up with a number of emails I received from banks inviting me to go and educate them about crypto. So in that short period of time, we've seen the banks do a great deal of work to educate themselves, to recognize the opportunity, to get a true sense of where the risks are and how to mitigate the risks. And we as Zerov are doing our piece in the property world to help facilitate those transactions and transfer some of that knowledge.
Great example, Mark. And I think it illustrates quite well how the process works. Maybe just to move a little bit specifically towards the process and how it applies for a real estate transaction. As you know, we do need a bank that facilitates the process. How would you describe, like in one word, your role as Zerov? Can I use like a comparison, like you are a foreign exchange, like somebody usually trading euro against Swiss, you are trading crypto against Swiss?
Yeah, you could, in one word, I would play our name back to you in reverse. Zerov, if you flip it in reverse, is Forex. That would be my one word for you, Niki. We are like a Forex exchange.
I think that explains it in one word, because fact is, you cannot go with crypto directly to the bank, right? It needs you in between as an interface to facilitate basically the whole value chain.
Yeah, absolutely. And not just the bank as well. As you will know, when you have a willing buyer who's turning up with crypto and a seller who might be willing to accept that buyer with crypto, you would imagine that you might have a deal to the untrained person without the experience of the financial markets or the property sector. But making that deal happen, even though you have a willing seller and a willing buyer with funds using crypto, is not as easy as just linking the two together. In fact, even with fiat, Niki, as you know, it's not as easy as just saying, okay, guys, go make a great deal and have fun forevermore living in your new property and enjoy the funds that you've got from it as the seller. So we do provide the exchange, but more importantly, we provide knowledge of how to step through the processes along the way and to work with these relationships that I mentioned earlier that we've built up with our trusted third-party providers, so that we can remove some of these friction points by bringing to bear our experience, developing the processes that deliver the information that is required to support the deal and to allow the deal to move through in as frictionless way as possible, as well as the banking piece, which is important because the settlement needs to happen in specific ways in specific geographies. So for example, in Switzerland, as I understand it, you have a very specific process where the transaction, the final transaction, needs to be conducted using something like a guaranteed payment from the bank to the buyers and the sellers' bank accounts, and that process is respected by Zerov. And with our banking partners in Switzerland, we've built this process that replicates what exists with the layer of crypto over the top of it.
Great, Sophia. So we have a solution. We have a certified solution. We have a FINMA accepted solution. We have the banks who work with you. We have the notary who accepts obviously the entire chain. It sounds like a lot of work, Marc. What does it cost?
Niki, I'm only 18 years old, really. I just look like this because of the work of Zerov. Look, you're right. Because there is quite a bit of work that takes place, you know, it's not for free. And our fees vary from approximately 1.5%, say up to maybe 4.5% to 5%. And that variance depends on the complexity of each of the clients and the assets. For example, if the client, as I mentioned earlier, is deemed high risk or has a very complicated situation in relation to KYC, and we need to undertake more work to satisfy our own processes, and maybe to provide more information to our banking partners, legal partners, and maybe even the notary, then those fees can rise. And for example, if the property asset is held in a company structure that might be quite complex, then more time is required to run through the administration that we need to undertake to give the information to these trusted third parties. So that's why there's such a spread. But you're right, Niki, we, you know, much as we would like to do this for free, or I'm not sure, Nick, if we would like to do this for free. I know you and Daniel would probably say, no, we're not going to do this for free. We can't do it for free because there is a lot of work that needs to be undertaken on our side. But notwithstanding, you know, we think the fees that we charge are very fair. And certainly if you look at traditional transaction fees for, say, credit card companies, or even some of the large exchanges that we mentioned earlier, Niki, the large crypto exchanges that we mentioned earlier, our fees are still greater value than some of those alternatives, whether it be a credit card company or whether it be a traditional large crypto exchange.
Absolutely, absolutely. Marc, whilst you were talking, I had time to watch a little bit of the chat. Incredible how many questions are popping up here. talking also about complexity. I translate here the question as it just came in. Guys, great webinar, and thank you for providing a solution to a certified crypto transaction in real estate. This is not in blockchain yet, correct? Question mark. If not, are you working on this too?
Yeah, so it's a great question. The transactions we are not placing on the blockchain. We're not building a process that is automated or facilitated using a blockchain to bring greater efficiency there. The problem we're solving at the moment is simply allowing buyers to access the crypto market, the holders of crypto who want to buy property, and allowing holders of crypto who want to buy property through a regulated and Swiss headquartered entity. That's really the problem that we're solving at this point in time, Niki.
It's actually an interesting aspect, you know, and I have to say, I sometimes have the impression there's maybe even a big confusion, you know, about a certified transaction that we spoke about and a blockchain technology. I'm just thinking from a real estate perspective. I usually represent residential property. Our traditional buyer is a buyer who's looking into buying real estate for his own use as his family home. So not necessarily talking about from an investor's point of view. Does it even make sense in a country with a great legal safety structure like Switzerland to put a normal real estate transaction that we currently process through the bank, through our notary, into a blockchain?
Another good question, Niki, and we veer a little way away here from Zerov's core competence, which is to facilitate these transactions. But let me give you a couple of examples of where I think there is real value in putting a property transaction on the blockchain, as opposed to using crypto to buy a piece of property. Let's say, for example, land registry, and how you prove that you are the owner of your family home. Now, in a country as safe and as well regulated as Switzerland's, you might be very happy that everything is in fact paper or digital record held by a centrally controlled, well-respected and generally trusted organization who you can go to and ask for a copy of your document when you need it. But in some countries around the world that are less secure and might be in the midst of a war, then there is real concern that if that authority or if that office that contains your records is taken over during an invasion and those records are then destroyed, that you no longer have the proof that can demonstrate internationally that you are the rightful legal owner of your family home. And in those instances, there is, I would suggest, quite a strong argument to say that process of land registry could be strengthened by converting records to a record that exists on the blockchain, which, excuse me, which cannot be destroyed, which is displaying all the values of a blockchain, which is that the record is permanent, it's omnipresent, and it can be accessed by anyone to prove, in this example, the rightful legal ownership of a family home. And just by going into an office where the servers sit or the paper versions sit and destroying that office and the original record, you can't take away the audit trail of rightful ownership. So that's one example where I think putting records on the blockchain could have some value. Another example where I think putting property on the blockchain could add value is from a commercial perspective. So not thinking about the family home, but thinking more, for example, of a piece of commercial property real estate. It might well be that there is an argument to suggest that by taking that asset, disaggregating it, breaking it down into smaller chunks and putting those chunks as shares on a blockchain, then you're allowing a wider range of investors to come in and buy a smaller piece of that asset, having the attestation to the ownership of that asset supported by the blockchain and eventually represented on the blockchain as the deeds of ownership, as if you will, and that has the opportunity to open up, quite a liquid secondary market where those tokens of ownership could be traded between other parties. Now, that second example I give you, many of your audience who are specialists in the property market might wish to debate that a bit further, but I'm just giving you, a couple of examples where I think putting property on the blockchain has a lot more value than necessarily putting a transaction like the type of transaction that we're talking about on the blockchain.
Fantastic, Marc. Listen, so many questions popping up here. Exceptional discussion. We also need to watch time a little bit, and I would actually say for today we finish at the peak of this discussion. It was extremely helpful, very interesting. Not on the peak of crypto, we have not arrived there yet. I guess we all expect the currency to go above 20 and not throw up again. Not on the peak of crypto in a real estate context. I think there are many stories and endeavors to come. It was really good talking to you guys today. To everybody, the next physical event will take place on the 21st of September. It's part of a crypto conference in the NFT pop-up gallery in Zurich. That's at Bärengasse, where Engel Völkers, together with Xerov, are proud to invite you soon. More details to follow via email. In the meantime, please do not hesitate to get in touch with us for any questions that you may have, be it buying on real estate with crypto, be it maybe on another question, how Zerov can support you. Thank you for joining. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Marc. It was an absolute pleasure to have you here. Thank you to all the participants for being with us. I wish you a great afternoon and look forward to welcome you again soon.
Thank you, Niki. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Niki. Thanks, everybody.